Here's the question people normally ask often. Is an old film camera a 4K camera or 8K? It depends on the film format, the film stock, how it was shot, and what a lab does with the negative. In this video, we'll find the answer for this question. People care about this because remasters are everywhere. Classic epics, old blockbusters, even TV shows. Some remasters blow people away. Others make faces look weird. That sparks the same suspicion. Are the labs lying? Are they faking resolution? Or did the camera actually record that much? We'll answer that. But first, an essential rule. You can't invent detail that was never recorded. You can scan higher, guess intelligently, and process carefully, but you can't conjure real detail out of thin air. Not all film is the same. Small formats like 16mm capture less detail than 35mm. Big formats, 65mm, 70mm, IMAX, capture a lot more. The practical takeaway, where the original negative sits on that size scale, largely determines whether 4K is enough, or whether the film genuinely benefits from 8K or higher. Important, film isn't pixels. It's an emulsion made of tiny silver crystals or dye clouds. That randomness is called grain, and it behaves differently from camera pixels. Up close, it looks messy. From normal viewing distances, it reads as detail. A well-shot 35mm negative under ideal conditions often maps practically into the 4K range in perceived detail. Image analysts measuring fine-grain 35mm put the real-world equivalent of roughly 12 to 20 megapixels, which explains why 4K is a practical sweet spot for most 35mm restorations. That doesn't mean every 35mm film is 4K. Factors like film stock, lighting, camera lenses, and prints matter. But for many well-shot studio features, 4K captures what's really there. 65/70mm and IMAX and 8K large format negatives, the 65/70mm family, and IMAX size film genuinely hold far more detail. Those formats can benefit from 8K or higher archival scans because the extra pixels actually reveal textures that 4K cannot. That's why restorers sometimes choose 8K for large format material. Even when a release will be 4K, labs often overscan. They scan the full aperture at higher resolution. Two reasons. One, the larger scan records grain and subtle modulation, so colorists have more data to work with. Two, it future-proofs the archive so better tools later can reprocess richer material. Archives and the FIAF guidance recommend full aperture overscans for preservation and stabilization workflows. More pixels can also mean more grain. If restorers panic and apply heavy-handed denoising or sharpening, they remove the film's texture. Skin gets plastic, cloth loses weave, the image feels wrong. That's the grain vs pixel paradox. Higher resolution reveals grain structure, and mishandling it ruins the look. Practical restoration is craft, not horsepower. Digital became dominant for practical reasons. Cheaper, immediate playback, easier VFX. The DI, digital intermediate workflow, where film is scanned and assembled digitally, made the transition smoother. Then cameras like the Arri Alexa arrived with very wide dynamic range and pleasing color science, letting cinematographers get film-like images straight from digital capture. The Alexa family brought 14 plus stops of dynamic range to production cameras, which is a big reason digital became the standard for many shoots. So digital didn't just win on convenience, it closed the aesthetic gap in many scenarios. That is why some modern digital cinematography can equal or beat older film captures in everyday viewing. A proper remaster is a pipeline, not a filter. First, high-resolution scanning. 2K, 4K, 8K depending on source and archival aims. Then frame-by-frame restoration, scratch removal, stabilization, warp fixes. This is slow and often manual. After that, color grading using ACES HDR workflows to preserve intent. Then comes audio restoration, hiss removal, pops, and spatial remastering. Then final mastering, DCP, archival masters, and streaming files. This work requires archivists, film technicians, and colorists. It's not a weekend job. So far, we've talked about how much detail film can hold. But to really understand why people argue about whether film is 4K or 8K, you have to see how filmmakers actually used it. Film wasn't just a recording medium, it was the backbone of the entire art form. Take Ben-Hur, 1959, a movie famous for its scale long before digital existed. That chariot race, it was hundreds of actors, real horses, massive sets, and crews shooting with 65mm film cameras. The choice wasn't aesthetic alone. Larger formats literally captured more real information per frame. That gave later restorations rich material to work with decades later. The original negative for Ben-Hur was scanned at extremely high resolution for its anniversary, partly because that 65mm negative held far more detail than typical 35mm. That's part of why its restoration remains a benchmark. In the early days of cinema, film was not just a recording medium, it was a craft tool. Camera operators didn't have instant feedback. There were no digital monitors. They shot blind, trusting light meters, intuition, and the role of an expensive negative. Film formats evolved with storytelling demands. In the 1950s, widescreen formats like CinemaScope were invented partly to lure audiences out of their living rooms and back into theaters. Directors and cinematographers learned how to use the wider frame, and that choice affected how much information ended up on the negative. A 65mm frame has nearly 3.5 times the image area of 35mm. That extra surface isn't a marketing stat, it's real physical information. When filmmakers chose those big formats, Ben-Hur, Lawrence of Arabia, they were literally writing more light into each frame. Restorers who scan those negatives today find details that smaller formats simply never had. Then came larger formats, VistaVision, 65mm, and eventually IMAX, each step aimed at capturing more of the real world. Bigger negatives meant more surface area, which meant more potential detail. That's why a properly scanned 70mm frame can look more textured and dimensional than many modern digital shots. The first digital moment and why it was controversial. Digital didn't overtake film because it looked better at first. It wasn't even close. Early digital cameras in the late 1990s and early 2000s, like the Sony Cinealta, were noisy and had harsh highlight clipping. Cinematographers often describe them as clinical, flat, or unfinished. Digital's advantage was always workflow, instant playback, endless takes, and a direct path to VFX. George Lucas pushed the industry with Attack of the Clones, one of the first major studio films shot end-to-end in digital. But the early digital look was different, and cinematographers learned to adapt. The aesthetic gap narrowed only after cameras like the Arri Alexa matched film's latitude and highlight roll-off. Everything changed with the Arri Alexa. Released in 2010, it brought dynamic range and highlight roll-off that finally felt film-like in real-world conditions. Directors and cinematographers adopted it, not because it was convenient, but because it gave them a look they were comfortable with. wide latitude, smooth highlights, and believable skin tones. Films like Skyfall, The Revenant, and Joker proved digital could be cinematic in its own right, not digital looking, but cinematic. So what does all this mean for 4K versus 8K? Those historical choices, format, stocks, workflows, are the reason the question of resolution isn't simple. A film camera isn't defined by a digital resolution number. It's defined by how much information was physically captured and how that interacts with modern scanning technology. So when someone asks whether film should be scanned at 4K or 8K, they're really asking how much of the original scene detail survived the camera, the stock, the lens, the lighting, and the lab processes. And that's where both history and technology collide. So when someone asks, is film 4K or 8K? The answer lives in choices, format, lenses, stock, and how a movie was shot. Some films had extra surface to begin with. Others were shaped by on-set conditions. That's why the same remastering process can feel miraculous on one film and wrong on another. Final takeaway, there's no single answer, but a good rule of thumb is 35mm often matches the practical sweet spot of 4K. Large formats reward 8K. The difference isn't superhero pixels, it's format, craft, and archive quality. If you'd like to see a detailed video on how movies are remastered, drop a comment below, and comment your favorite remastered movie below. And if you like these kinds of video, make sure to subscribe.